In the deep, wind-scoured deserts of the ancient Arabian Peninsula, long before recorded empires etched their names into stone, there rose a civilization so powerful, so towering in stature and ambition, that the Quran would later describe them as unmatched among the peoples of the earth, a nation carved not merely from sand and stone but from arrogance, strength, and defiance itself, a people remembered as Qaum-e-ʿād, whose story unfolds not as myth or legend but as a divine warning preserved across centuries, echoing through revelation, tafsir, and the moral memory of humanity, and it begins in an age after the flood of Nuh, when the world was rebuilding, when tribes spread across newly cleansed lands, and among them emerged the descendants of ibn Iram, settling in the region known as Al-Ahqaf, the winding sand dunes between modern-day Oman, Yemen, and the Empty Quarter, a land of harsh winds and vast horizons that would become the stage for one of history's most dramatic rises and catastrophic falls. The Quran describes them as a people endowed with immense physical power, towering bodies, advanced craftsmanship, and architectural mastery, constructing lofty pillars and monumental structures that pierced the skyline, symbols of permanence in a world still fragile from divine judgment, and classical mufassirun like Ibn Kathir and al-Tabari recount that they believed their strength rendered them invincible, their cities unassailable, their future secure, as they carved homes into mountains, raised palaces upon the sands, and proclaimed dominion over their surroundings, and yet beneath this outward grandeur lay a spiritual emptiness. For Qaum-e-ʿād had abandoned Tawhid, the oneness of Allah, and turned instead to idol worship, venerating false gods believed to control rain, wind, and fertility, their rituals steeped in superstition, their society stratified by power and pride, their rulers tyrannical, their elite oppressive, and their moral compass shattered by indulgence and cruelty. And it was into this world, at the height of their dominance, that Allah sent a messenger from among them, a man of noble lineage and unyielding faith, the Prophet Hud, peace be upon him, whose mission would become the axis upon which their fate would turn. Hud rose not as a conqueror but as a warner, standing amid the stone halls and towering columns of Iram, his voice calm yet resolute, calling his people back to the worship of one God, reminding them that their strength was a gift, not a guarantee, that the same Lord who granted power could withdraw it in an instant, and the Quran captures his plea with piercing clarity, as he declares that he seeks no reward, no dominance, only their salvation, urging them to seek forgiveness so that rain might return, crops might flourish, and blessings might endure. But his words fell upon hearts hardened by excess, and the chiefs of Ād responded with mockery and scorn, accusing Hud of foolishness, of madness, of betraying the traditions of their ancestors, and they challenged him openly, demanding that he bring the punishment he warned of if his message were true, a defiance that the Quran presents not as ignorance but as willful rebellion, a conscious rejection of divine truth born from arrogance. And as years passed, Hud persisted, enduring ridicule, isolation, and threats, while the signs around them began to shift subtly at first, then unmistakably, for the rains that once nourished their lands ceased, the skies withheld their mercy, and drought tightened its grip on Al-Ahqaf, wells dried, crops failed, and the people of Ād, once masters of abundance, found themselves confronting scarcity, yet even then they refused to reflect inward, instead turning more fervently to their idols, performing rituals to false gods they believed controlled the winds and clouds, and when a dark cloud finally appeared on the horizon, rolling toward their valleys, the people rejoiced, proclaiming it a bearer of rain, a sign that their gods had answered them, while Hud, standing among them, recognized the truth with a clarity that sent a chill through the air, for this was not a cloud of mercy but of destruction, and the Quran describes the moment with stark precision, revealing that what they perceived as salvation was in fact the instrument of their annihilation, a wind unleashed by divine command, a furious, screaming tempest that would rage for 7 nights and 8 days, uprooting everything in its path, tearing down pillars, flattening palaces, and hurling the mighty bodies of Āwth-me-Qrāndi as though they were hollow trunks of palm trees, and as the first gusts struck, panic spread through the cities of Iram, the wind howling with an otherworldly force, stripping flesh from bone, lifting men who once boasted of their strength and casting them lifeless upon the sands, and the tafsir recounts that no structure could withstand it, no fortress could shelter them, as the very elements they claimed mastery over became their undoing, and Hud and the few who believed with him were spared, sheltered by divine protection as the civilization of Āwth-me-Qrāndi was erased from the earth, their cities buried beneath dunes, their legacy reduced to scattered remnants and Quranic verses recited across generations, and when the wind finally ceased, silence fell upon Al-Ahqaf, a silence heavy with the weight of judgment, and the land that once echoed with arrogance became a barren reminder of consequence, and thus the rise and fall of Qaum-e-ʿād stands not merely as an ancient tragedy but as a universal narrative woven into the Quran, cited repeatedly as a lesson for those who come after, a demonstration that material power without moral grounding leads only to ruin, that rejecting divine guidance invites destruction, and that no civilization, however advanced, can defy the will of Allah without consequence, and as centuries pass and sands shift, the story of Āwth-me-Qrāndi remains, resurfacing in revelation, in tafsir, in the moral consciousness of humanity, setting the stage for the next great warning etched into history, as other nations would rise, repeat their errors, and face their own reckonings, a cycle of pride and punishment that would echo from the deserts of Arabia to the ends of the earth, and it is here, amid the ruins of forgotten pillars and the whispers of relentless winds, that part 1 of this story closes, leaving behind a haunting question that reverberates through time itself, when power blinds a people to truth, and warnings are dismissed as madness. How long can any civilization truly stand? After the winds of annihilation fell silent and the sands of Al-Ahqaf settled over the broken remnants of a once unrivaled civilization, the world moved on, but the story of Qaum-e-ʿād did not vanish with their cities, for Allah preserved their fate not in stone or ruin alone but in revelation itself, embedding their rise and destruction into the Quran as an eternal sign, a living warning recited across centuries, and it is in this aftermath, in the long shadow cast by their obliteration, that the full magnitude of their story emerges with clarity and gravity, because the Quran does not mention Āwth-me-Qrāndi once or twice in passing, but repeatedly, across multiple surahs, returning to them again and again as if to insist that humanity must not forget, must not dismiss, must not assume that power alone ensures survival, and Surah Al-Haqqa describes them as being destroyed by a furious, violent wind that Allah unleashed upon them relentlessly, emphasizing not only the physical destruction but the absolute helplessness of a people who once claimed superiority over all others, while Surah Al-A'qaf revisits their final moments, highlighting the tragic irony of their misjudgment, as they mistook the approaching cloud of punishment for rain, a detail that tafsir scholars explain as symbolic of spiritual blindness. A people so disconnected from divine truth that they could no longer distinguish mercy from wrath, and Surah Hud places Qaum-e-ʿād with Makron-d within a broader pattern of prophetic history, aligning their fate with that of Nuh, Thamud, and later Fir'aun, constructing a divine narrative in which arrogance, rejection of prophets, and moral corruption lead inevitably to collapse, not because Allah desires destruction, but because societies that sever themselves from justice, humility, and accountability become architecturally unsound at their core, and classical mufassirun such as Ibn Kathir elaborate that the physical might of with Makron-d was not incidental but central to their trial. Because strength itself became their idol, their proof against accountability, their excuse to deny resurrection and judgment, and this is why Hud's message focused relentlessly on reminding them of their origin, their dependence, and their ultimate return to Allah, a reminder they perceived as an insult rather than mercy, and when the believers were saved and the disbelievers eradicated, Hud did not emerge as a triumphant ruler over ruins but as a solemn witness to divine justice, departing with his followers to continue life elsewhere, leaving behind a land emptied not only of people but of pride itself, and with the passage of generations, the physical traces of Iram Dat al-Imd, the city of lofty pillars, faded beneath the dunes, becoming a subject of mystery, speculation, and later archaeological curiosity, yet the Quran never allows the story to devolve into legend, anchoring it firmly in moral purpose rather than geographical certainty, because the lesson of with Makron-d does not depend on finding their ruins but on recognizing their reflection in later civilizations. And it is here that the story expands beyond Arabia, beyond antiquity, and assumes global significance, for the Quran presents Qaum-e-ʿād with Makron-d as an archetype of imperial arrogance, a civilization intoxicated by engineering, expansion, and dominance, convinced that their achievements exempted them from accountability, a mindset that would resurface in empire after empire, from ancient tyrannies to modern superpowers, and this is why the Quran asks repeatedly, in tones that resemble a cosmic cross-examination, have you not seen how your Lord dealt with Makron-d, transforming history into evidence, remembrance into responsibility, and tafsir scholars emphasize that the repetition is intentional, because forgetfulness is humanity's greatest vulnerability, and the fate of with Makron-d is meant to interrupt complacency, to destabilize the illusion of permanence, and to remind societies that moral decay precedes physical collapse, that injustice erodes foundations long before walls fall, and that prophetic warnings ignored do not disappear but return transformed into consequences. And when modern readers encounter the story today, recited in prayer, studied in tafsir, or invoked in sermons, they are not merely engaging with the past but standing before a mirror, because the Quranic portrayal of with Makron-d speaks to every age that confuses technological advancement with ethical superiority, every leadership that silences reformers, every society that mocks accountability while exploiting power, and in this way, the destruction of ʻઆd becomes not a relic of divine anger but a manifestation of divine law, a consistent principle woven into the fabric of history itself, that civilizations rise through gratitude and justice and fall through arrogance and denial, and as the final echoes of their story reverberate through revelation, the Quran closes the narrative not with despair but with direction, urging reflection, repentance, and humility, offering humanity the chance to choose differently, to listen when warned, to recognize that strength is a trust, not a shield, and thus the tale of Qaum-e-ʿād, when viewed in its entirety, unfolds like a vast, cinematic chronicle stretching from the dawn of post-flood humanity to the end of time, a History Channel scale documentary written not by human historians but by divine wisdom, where deserts become witnesses, winds become instruments, prophets become voices of conscience, and ruined civilizations become lessons etched into eternity, and as the camera of imagination pulls back from the silent sands of Al-Ahqaf, from the buried pillars of Iram, from the scattered bones of a people who once declared themselves unbeatable, the narrator's voice fades not into silence but into warning, reminding every generation that passes over the earth that power without faith is fragile, that arrogance invites erasure, and that the fate of Qaum-e-ʿād is not merely something that happened long ago, but something that can happen again wherever truth is rejected, guidance is mocked, and humility is abandoned.